This
is Journal
club.
Welcome back to another Journal Club episode, guys. So, have you ever gotten a paper cut ever? Maybe you fell and scraped your knee. Usually, it's pretty helpful that you stop bleeding in a timely fashion, or else you would probably die, right? So blood clotting is quite important to our day-to-day function, I'd say. But there is the other side to it, in which too much blood clotting when you don't want it can be really bad. So that's what thrombosis is. It's like a condition of uncontrolled blood clotting, and that can stop blood flow to important areas and can be life-threatening. So there's this interesting phenomenon that some surgeons and medical professionals have noticed, right? So for people who get critical medical devices implanted into them, where bloodstream can access, so for example, a cardiovascular stent or something that helps stop heart attacks and keep your heart vessels open, a lot of times they found is that after getting these surgical implants, blood clots would start forming on top of the medical equipment, and that is really bad, of course, obviously.
So basically you're telling me there's a primary problem, which is they need these vessels to be expanded so they can die of a heart failure or something.
Right.
So they put the stent in, but now there's this secondary issue that arises from the stent itself.
Exactly. Yeah, which is this blood clotting where you don't want blood clotting to be. So a lot of people began to wonder, why is this happening, right? These procedures are in sterile environments and they do their best to use top grade materials and qualities. So what's causing these clots to form on top of medical equipment, right?
It's a good question.
Thank you. So that was the aim of this paper, called The Influence of Surface Chemistry on Adsorbed Fibrinogen Conformation, Orientation, Fiber Formation, and Platelet Adhesion. Wow.
So we've been talking about this clotting is important when you get a paper cut, but this clotting is bad, for example, when it happens on the stent. But how does the clotting process actually work? What are the proteins involved? What happens?
Great questions. So for the actual process for clotting, basically it's all down to this one big important protein in your blood called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen, it kind of has a structure like this. And basically what happens is that normally when you get a wound or something, signals in your body will release this enzyme called thrombin, and that will cleave the fibrinogen at these places, releasing fibrinopeptides. And basically what that does, it allows this really important region called the alpha C domain to be exposed. And the alpha C domain allows monomers of fibrinogen called fibrin to essentially stack on top of each other, on top of the blood vessel surface, and make fibers. So it kind of looks like ropes of fibers, right? And these fibers allow proteins to come and stick on them, and eventually it'll form what you know as a massive clot to stop the bleeding.
One thing that, so is the clotting that happens naturally, for example, to make you stop bleeding when you get a paper cut, and the unnatural clotting that happens on these stents, are they the same process?
So that's the question, right? In essence, yes, it is the same process, as in the fibrinogen will get cleaved in some manner, making fibrin monomers that polymerize into fibers, and then platelets will come and aggregate on that. But the method in which the fibrinogen gets cleaved is actually what was the primary discovery of this paper. So let's get into that. Basically what they did is that they took 4 different types of polymers called polystyrene, PMMA, PLA, and P4VP. These polymers all have different properties about them. So they created thin films on top of different substrates, and then they flowed fibrinogen solution over these polymers, sort of to mimic the natural human environment with blood flow. So they flowed it over these polymers and saw basically how did fiber formation and therefore coagulation change based on the material. So the biggest correlation they found was between the contact angle, which I'll explain real quick. So basically, contact angle is measured by taking the material you have and putting a drop of distilled water on it, and then scientists can measure the angle between the film and the water droplet to determine how hydrophobic or hydrophilic it is. So if the material is extremely hydrophobic, it doesn't like water, the water will bead up and touch the least amount as possible and will have a bigger contact angle. So if you have a contact angle of 90, for example, that's hydrophobic. Meanwhile, if it's hydrophilic, it'll kind of spread out and attach as much to the water as it can, making a smaller contact angle. So the scientists measured contact angles for all of these different materials. I'll put the figure on screen. And they basically found that contact angle or the hydrophobicity of these materials greatly impacted how much fiber formed. So they found that the more hydrophobic a material was, as is the case with like polystyrene, the more fibers ended up forming and the more platelets got stuck and more clots formed.
Yeah, so like sure there's this correlation between this water contact angle and therefore hydrophobicity and basically how much clotting was formed on the actual material. But how do they like explore that and justify that the hydrophobicity is actually causing the clots to form rather than just being a side effect? Like there's another factor in the material that's impacting it.
Right, yeah. So to determine that this like correlation that they found could actually be properly attributed to like a causal relationship, they used antibodies to block certain domains and basically see like what was being interacted with in these surfaces. So there are these regions on fibrinogen that are hydrophobic themselves, and what they found is that when in contact with hydrophobic surfaces, they were being naturally cleaved. So the hydrophobic parts of the fibrinogen likes the hydrophobic parts of the material, allowing them to naturally come apart and form, like expose the proper domains that need
the sticky part
that allows fibers to form. Yeah.
So basically the hydrophobicity is actually inducing the clots to form.
Exactly. So instead of in a natural process where you have an enzyme cutting or cleaving the protein, you have the material itself causing it to be cleaved.
Yeah, but it's also important to note that like in the study, the way they tested it, I think you mentioned, was like they have these materials and then they flow fibrinogen over it. Mm-hmm. And like that's the closest they got to simulating what's happening in our body. Mm-hmm. But like what are some factors that maybe they're not investigating that could kind of affect this relationship?
Right, so one big thing is that they did use thin films of these materials, so not exactly like the stents themselves. They didn't take stents and flow fibrinogen over them and then like measure the contact angle of those. They just took these different materials that stents could be made out of and tested that. I don't know about other limitations.
Do you know which... Sorry, side note. Do you know which of the polymers is like the most common stent used, or is it just kind of like these are the...
Yeah, like which material is currently being used?
Is it like different manufacturers use different things, but they all kind of have a bad effect to different degrees?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure.
Do they not use like anticoagulants most of the time?
So something that they mention actually is that a lot of the times they will use like anticoagulant medication to like manage these properties, but a big side effect is that it affected the ability to
clot for actual...
Yeah,
like the paper cutters,
like actual clots, and also it prevented endolithialization.
Oh,
yeah. So like changing material would stop clotting and it wouldn't have these side effects like the generalized anticoagulant medication.
So you still be able to clot when you need it to, like if you're injured or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like I think other things you need to take into consideration when putting stents in, like it's not just the material, like what is this material? How strong is it? How compact? I don't know. Like what are things you need to take into consideration to actually put this, like apply it?
Yeah. Like, for example, they found that if there was a contact angle of less than, I believe it was like 69 or 62, then no fibers would form at all. But a lot of the things, this is either for PLA or P4VP, and I guess it's not as commonly known, but PLA is like the plastic that a lot of your plastic water cups, disposable water cups, are made out of, and that's really flimsy, right? Mm-hmm. So if you need something like a stent to hold your vessels physically open, that's not going to work out because it's quite like malleable. Mm-hmm. We've been using stents as an example, but other things, like this is for any medical device.
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about. Like,
yeah.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, stents. That's what we've been saying this whole time. But like, what are other applications of this where like we're putting stuff in our body.
Yeah,
Maybe like a hip replacement. Or
yeah,
something?
like grafts. Anything that comes in contact with your blood is at risk of this, right? So it's a pretty big danger, I'd say.
Like a medical device, maybe, or like a heart. Sorry,
Yes.
like a pacemaker or something.
Yeah, like
maybe, too.
pacemakers, blood
That's dangerous.
pumps, grafts.
Yeah, I wonder, like, going off the results of the study, if someone can do like an observational study, just seeing, like, surveying patients, what type, like, what did you get, what material did they put in you, and then, like, maybe what happened after that.
Yeah, did you notice?
Yeah, see the correlation between that.
Right.
Did you notice that you had a blood clot?
Well, like, how many of you guys, like, died of heart?
And also, this definitely does raise a lot of questions as to, like, how can we optimize the materials that we're making things, but also, like, what are other ways that we can address this problem other than just using, like, whole body drugs, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Hopefully changing the material.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
this would be a crazy solution. Like, this, it's like localized. Yeah.
Wait, so how common is it to get blood clots after like using these materials with like stents or whatever?
I would say it depends on the
Yeah,
duration.
I mean,
Like, is it like
pretty
common enough to like where like it needs
It's a
like
problem.
a replacement in material?
I think it's killing people. It's a problem.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty low prevalence, but like you wouldn't want to
yeah,
get.
but
Okay,
if it's
yeah.
even a possible risk, you want
Oh
to
yeah,
minimize
you'd
that.
want to
Yeah, you would wanna
minimize
optimize.
that.
Also, after this paper was released, they found that this is generalizable not just to like medical devices in general. So anything that makes your body itself more hydrophobic can pose a big issue. So for example, they found like COVID patients during the pandemic, oftentimes, you know, they were at risk for these huge clots in their legs, right? Do you remember that? Maybe that was like one of the very, very severe symptoms. And they actually attributed this to a viral infection causing lipid drop synthesis. So it's like when your body gets infected with some of these viruses, it has an automatic response to deposit like lipid droplets on your cells and like on your vascular
protect them?
walls. It's like the function is not really known, but they just know that it happens even within like 2 hours of infection. And these lipid drops make your vessels more hydrophobic, and that can cause blood clotting. So it's not necessarily just applicable to like medical equipment and stuff. It's like any other factors that maybe can promote clotting can be attributed to surface chemistry.
Yeah, so in the future, I would like to see, like, as with all biomedical discoveries, slowly transitioning into more like in vivo simulations, and maybe eventually even testing in humans. So we'll see where it goes, I guess.
Yeah.
We'll keep you updated.
Okay.
Why are we clapping?
Because I want to clap. Okay. Okay.
No, we have to go in order. Like,
What's the order?
Kevin Chen signing off.